what it comes down to is there is a fundamental tension between what Next.js wants to be and what Blitz wants to be. Next.js and Vercel, they're more focused on front-end experiences. And so they frankly just don't care about adding the power features that Fullstack people need. And so Blitz adds those power features that you really need for building Fullstack apps.
Hi everyone, welcome to JavaScript Jam. I am Ishan Anand, CTO at Layer Zero. Unfortunately, Mark Mercado, our VP of Engineering, who's usually my co-host, couldn't make it today, but he sends his best wishes and we'll try to channel his spirit as much as possible into this episode. In today's episode, we have Brandon, the creator of Blitz.js, one of the leading contenders for the full stack frameworks that are trying to really build out JavaScript's best attempt at doing what Ruby on Rails has done. So, Brandon, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the podcast. I know we've chatted a handful of times before, but great to get you on the podcast. Before we jump into Blitz, why don't you just tell us yourself, your background and how you got started into building it?
Sure. So my dad was an electrical engineer, and I thought, well, that seems interesting, so I'll go get a double E degree. So I did that, but in the process of that, I took some software classes, and then in those classes, I was like, wow, now this is actually fun compared to the other electrical engineering stuff. So I got a job right away as an intern, as an embedded software engineer, programming microchips. So I was at that job for 5 years. But somewhere in there, I read the book Getting Real by the folks at Basecamp.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like about, having your own software business. And that really kind of lit a dream inside me to have my own software business at some point. And like to be able to make a website and a web app and make money from that. And so that led to me eventually learning Ruby on Rails, which got me into web programming. And then I wanted to do more complex stuff, more complex apps. And so that led me to try Ember. That didn't really stick. And then I learned React. And then I just fell in love with React and JavaScript. And then I guess the next thing is the past 4 years I've been working as an independent consultant. And so I was building a lot of things from the ground up, and a lot of my kind of experience there is what led to starting Blitz.
Very interesting. So when you're doing consulting, was it primarily Ruby on Rails? Was it Ember? Was it React? Was it some combination of all of those?
It was primarily JavaScript and React.
Okay.
Yep. So very little. It had a little bit of Rails, a little bit of a few other things, but mostly React and JavaScript.
Okay. And then when did you get started on Blitz? And what led you to starting it? And when did you start?
So I started February last year, and I had a phone call with a friend of mine who is a Ruby on Rails developer, and we were kind of sparring back and forth about what was more productive to build with, Ruby on Rails or JavaScript and React. And I kind of got frustrated because I couldn't really win. I couldn't argue that I couldn't win against the argument of Rails being simpler, less to deal with, and it's just simpler to build things. And anyways, there was Next.js had released API routes not a long time before that, and Prisma was still in beta at that point. And so something clicked inside me in that conversation. I was like, you know what? I bet we could cobble something together with Next.js and Prisma and really make a Ruby on Rails experience. And so a week later, I announced Blitz on Twitter. And I had a couple hundred lines of prototype code. That was it. I didn't even have a GitHub repo. But the tweet storm that I put out had the vision of what it was going for.
Oh, wow.
And, it got tons of traction. Tons of people were excited. And I put that out there before building it because I didn't want to waste a bunch of time building it if nobody wanted it. But it became obvious really quickly that this is something that a lot of people were wanting.
I love the lean product management of doing the announcement first, right? And then seeing if there's demand or interest, essentially. Maybe we should actually back up. And for those folks who don't know Ruby on Rails or what makes it so great, do you want to just tell people, what that means when we say Ruby on Rails for the JavaScript or React ecosystem.
Yep.
Just briefly summarize like what it really means for the developer and why people really love Ruby on Rails.
So the big thing is that it's what I call a batteries included framework. So it has everything you need. So if you create a Rails app, like you have access to a database, you have your HTML, CSS, you have client or server side, um, logic, you're able to plug in background processing, and so it's just a really nice developer experience all around. You have a CLI that does really nice stuff for you, can generate code, um, and so that's kind of the main thing is like it just takes away like without something like that, you are left to, as a developer, to piece together a equivalent experience with all the libraries on authentication and testing and like linting, and you're just going to assemble all those together. Whereas with a framework like Rails or Blitz, a lot of that is done for you.
Yeah, the analogy I like to use is it's kind of like you're trying to build a house. And a lot of times, well, okay, you need to put the pieces of wood up and actually build out the scaffolding and everything. And Ruby on Rails kind of gives you maybe basically the scaffolding even better. I mean, literally the command is called scaffold.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to focus on the basic pieces that you're going to need from a regular CRUD app. Authentication is already built in and stuff like that. So
Right.
you get to focus more on the app rather than the basic pieces you already expect to be there, thanks to conventions and decisions that it's already had. And some of those are opinions that you may not agree with. Which gets me to my next question. Can you walk us through what the core opinions and pieces that you put into Blitz? Because kind of like Ruby on Rails, it combined a bunch of things together and said, here's what you should use.
Right.
What are those core things you piece together into the kind of ideal stack you're giving people?
So one of the first things I wanted was I wanted Blitz to be more flexible and less opinionated than Rails. Like still opinionated, but with Rails, it's hard to go off the rails. There is very kind of like they have strong opinions. So one of our foundational principles is loose opinions,
Yeah.
which means like we have a lot of opinions, recommendations for how to do things, but for the most part, we don't enforce very much at all. But for libraries and things, like it was like all the basics, right? So linting, testing, um, authentication, a database, um, a form library. We give you a choice of form library, but we kind of set it up for you. We don't have styling in there. We have recipes which
Mm-hmm.
allow you to easily add styling in, but that's like so it's like the testing, linting, like ESLint and Jest, like those are like so common. It's pretty much a simple choice to go ahead and include those. But for styling, like everybody has a different opinion, right? And so we stop
Yeah.
short of having an opinion on that. But instead of having an opinion there, we just make it really easy to bring your own styling. So that's where we try to solve for the majority use case, but then have like these extension points to allow you to do whatever you want as well.
Okay. Did you have a process by which you decided which pieces, or you were going to include and which ones you're going to leave to the developer, or you just kind of went by intuition from your own background building stuff?
Yeah, mainly my own intuition. We had I got a bunch of people early on that helped build out a lot of this stuff and helped decide on some
Yeah.
decisions. Um, so there was some conversation there, but a large part of it was driven by my own kind of intuition.
Okay. Speaking of team, like, I mean, you just started February of last year. Really impressive the progress you guys have made. How big is the team now that's working on it, and how is development funded?
It's essentially just me. So for the past year or more, like my average was about 30 hours a week working on Blitz, and then I was spending about 20 hours a week doing consulting. So there's been a bunch of other people that have contributed in their free time. We're over 300 contributors
Yeah.
now. But as far as the team, like it's mainly just me, kind of really carrying it forward, and then funding it for my own consulting. But now we're starting Flightcontrol, which is SaaS product, so that's going to help provide for Blitz going forward.
Yeah, interested in talking about Flightcontrol a little later. How big is like the number of core contributors to Blitz? Out of curiosity.
Technically, I'm the only one on the core team.
Oh, wow. Okay.
as of right now. So early on we had a couple others,
Yeah.
but then they ended up other stuff happening in life, and so it reduced to me. But we're looking to bring another one, someone else on soon.
Oh, okay. Well, let's actually just, we've talked a little bit around the edges of what it is. Why don't we just show people? I'd love to have you walk us through a demo and just show people how productive they can be in just a few minutes out of the box with Blitz. So if you want to get started sharing your screen and take it away, let's do that.
Okay, so I have just ran Blitz new JS Jam, and the Blitz
Okay.
CLI has generated this new app. So this is a list of the files. So there's quite a lot of files, but don't be overwhelmed. A lot of this is most of it's auth, and there's a lot of auth code we've put in there for you so that it's easy for you to customize versus being totally
Yeah.
abstracted away into some other library. Um, but it has everything you need, database and stuff already set up. So if we just run Blitz dev,
What's
this
the
will.
database currently?
So we have Prisma set up by default, which is your like
Okay.
ORM layer,
Yep.
and Prisma currently
That's the
supports
RM layer. Yeah.
SQLite, Postgres, MySQL, and Mongo. But we set up an SQLite database for you locally, so that way it's just
Okay.
works out of the box. But then you can easily switch to Postgres or something, which we recommend.
Okay. And do we want to briefly just explain to folks who aren't used to an ORM, like what Prisma does,
Yeah.
especially
So
Prisma 2?
um, Prisma 2 does your database migrations. Um, so let me bring this up here. So we have a schema file that in that you define your database schema in a GraphQL like syntax, your fields, types,
Mm-hmm.
etc., relationships, and then you run Blitz Prisma migrate, and it'll automatically migrate your database so that it's already working for you. But then it also provides a type safe database client. So you have like db.user.get or user db.user.create, etc.
Yeah. So instead of having to write SQL commands, I just write JavaScript functions
Exactly.
and it
For
queries the
TypeScript.
data for me. Okay.
Yep. So that the TypeScript piece is a big part of it because the Prisma client is fully type safe. So it's pretty cool. So the data you get out of it is fully type safe, the input and everything. So here's what you get just with a brand new app. You just simple starting page, but the kind of the key thing here is that we already have user authentication, sign up, log in, log out already set up. So I can click here. I can put in a password, and now I'm already logged in. User ID 1, user role, user. I can log out, log in, and have reset password flow. All of that's ready to go.
So
And
that's
then
great. So I just want to highlight, yeah, just under the hood, all the things you've given the developer right now. Like they don't have to build auth effectively. It's
exactly,
already there.
yes,
Start like the sample app out of the box already has auth. Okay, so that's fantastic. That's great.
yeah, it's yeah, I love it. It's so cool. Um, so um, sorry, switch windows here. So now,
And it looks
um,
like you're going to generate a new model.
yeah, so we want to just scaffold a
Okay.
new model. So we'll run blitz generate all project. You can pass it a list of fields that you want, like a name, a string. So we'll run that, and it will generate all the CRUD operations. So it has all the CRUD pages, and then it has the sorry, my computer is kind of slow right now, and that's a bug that's will be fixed in the next release. But so it has all the CRUD pages, all the queries and mutations that you need, and then it adds the model to your database, and we'll confirm that we want to go ahead and migrate the database. And now we can run blitz dev and go back here, and then we can go to /projects. Wait for it to start here. And then it has the whole flow already set up for you. So um, create, read, update. So here's your list of projects. There's nothing in the database yet, but we can click create
Mm-hmm.
project. Um, create a project, and then there you can see this is the project/1. So we have the routing kind of convention already set up for you. You can edit, delete, go back, see it, um, and ready for you to style and build out whatever custom functionality you want.
That's great. So could we switch over to the code just a little
Yep.
bit? Show
Yep.
people the model that got created in the schema definition.
So in the schema, down here is our model
Yeah.
project ID, created that, updated that name. And then
Yep.
if we go to say get project query, so this is just a function that runs on the server. It has a resolver.pipe thing here. It's just a functional pipe that pipes the output from one thing to the next.
Mm-hmm.
First thing runs input validation using Zod, which here's the schema for that. So it'll throw an error if it doesn't match that schema. Resolver.authorize will ensure that you're
Okay.
logged in. If you're not, it'll throw an error. You
Got
can
it.
also add a specific role if you want to require a specific role. And then inside of here, this is where you call
Nice.
db.project.find first, and this is Prisma, and return the project, and then there you go. So now if you go on the front end, so we
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like,
import
what's the
that
view
query,
piece of this? Yeah.
and then you pass it into the use query hook. And this line right here is all you need. Those two, the function that we just looked at that runs on the server, and then this hook, and that returns your project. So that does all the data fetching for you, the caching, automatic like refetch whenever you come back to the window, things like that. So there's no REST API, no GraphQL API, no HTTP, no fetching, none of that. It's just write a function, import it, and use it, and you have everything there, including type safety on the front end, which comes all the way from your database.
So, in other words, you just wrote how to get the data out of the database and how to massage it into a format. And then that's it. And then you here in the front end manipulate it as if you got back the same thing. And under the hood, you're handling the serialization. You're handling whether, what is the actual API that's actually like you don't have to worry about the API at all. You don't have to worry
Right.
about your API endpoints. You're not really thinking about APIs anymore, it sounds
Exactly.
like.
Exactly.
It's totally integrated, correct?
Yep. So you
Okay.
just think of it as calling functions, and the functions are called over the network.
What is it doing under the hood, just out of
It's an
curiosity?
RPC API. So each
Okay.
each query immutation has its own endpoint. That's an RPC endpoint, and then we just handle that for you.
Okay. Really interesting. The natural question is like, and maybe we should talk about this later on, like what happens when there's a non-web client potentially of these APIs, um, like a
So
native app or something like
you
that.
can use the RPC API directly. So we have some people with mobile
Yeah.
apps doing that, and we're
Okay.
gonna be adding first class integration with React Native. So you have the same like import magic there. But then also some people just stand up a GraphQL API just for the mobile apps as well.
Can you replace the guts of your RPC piece with the GraphQL, or is it sit as a parallel?
Currently, no.
How does it work?
It's set up so that at some point
Okay.
we could swap it out with GraphQL, if it makes sense. But yeah, currently no.
Okay. Interesting. Well, that'd be a great topic to come to because I'd love to talk towards the end about what people should look forward to. Um, and I'm not as familiar with useQuery. So useQuery is basically just you mentioned does all the caching for you,
Yeah. So it's
and
built on top
the
of
querying. So,
React
yeah.
Query,
Okay.
or SWR is another similar library.
Okay.
So if you're doing client side data fetching in React, like you should be using useQuery or SWR most likely.
Got it. Okay, so then here basically again to take us full circle back to where before I took us on this tangent, You basically wrote how to massage the data out of the database, very minimal massaging, and then you get to just use it like you already got it here on the front end.
Exactly.
And then you're just stuffing it into the components like regular React code.
Exactly.
That's a really smooth workflow, I have to say. Makes things a lot easier. So sorry, I interrupted you. So take us to where else you wanted to take us in this demo.
So that covers most of it. Like one thing to highlight here is this type for created at and updated at is a date type. And
Yeah.
so we automatically serialize and deserialize dates, maps, sets, like everything basically. And so exactly whatever you return on the server is exactly what comes out on the client, which is so cool. Like especially dealing with dates, you don't have to convert strings back to
Oh
dates
yeah.
and manipulate it.
Oh, it's one of those minor headaches that you do 1,000 times, and you almost don't realize the net aggregate pain it's created for you until
Yeah.
somebody points it out. The analogy I like to use for that is like, I don't know if you have an iPhone, but right, like when the iPhone Lightning connector came out, you didn't really think about how many times you were, trying to arrange the plugging cable up versus down in the right direction. But
Right.
here they took that off of you, and you suddenly just made it so much easier. You're like, why didn't somebody think of that before? So
Yep.
that's fantastic. That's really great. So that I have to say, that was, in a matter of minutes, you basically have, really the scaffold for a standard application. And it's been a long time since I've watched the very famous DHH, create a blog in 15 minutes with Ruby on
Yep.
Rails. Um, do you have like all of those pieces from that famous demo in Blitz at this point? Like you can basically, it feels like you've got most of it, but
I think
it's
most of
been a
it.
while for me.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've watched it as well.
Okay. So that's great. So, um, let's talk about when is 1.0? When can folks look forward to using this in production?
So we launched our beta back in February, March. And so we're getting really close to release candidate stage. And in fact, we have a ton of people already, like thousands of companies already using it in production, which is kind of wild. But um, so we're working towards 1.0. Been making the past like month, I've made a bunch of kind of huge progress in getting to there. So I can't promise anything, but I would be surprised if it's um, not before end of the year. So I expect it to be before end of the year.
Okay. Before concurrent mode. Sorry.
So well,
uh,
fun fact is that we started we had a decision at the very beginning, like should we just go all in on suspense in concurrent mode
yeah.
or not. And since Blitz was alpha at that stage, we're like, well, okay, let's go ahead and use React Experimental also and enable concurrent mode by default. So all Blitz users have been using concurrent mode and suspense for data fetching unless they explicitly turned it off. And it's been really cool. Like it totally removes that if loading else if error dance in your
Yeah.
component.
Yeah.
So it's just I love
Yeah.
it. So it's cool.
Oh, that's great. So you guys really are on the bleeding edge. Who can you speak of like the biggest companies or projects that are running in production with Blitz today?
So biggest project is kind of arbitrary. I don't really know how to quantify those. I don't know enough about it. But the companies I know that are using it is Agolia has 2 internal Blitz apps now. Graph CMS came on as a
Okay.
sponsor recently because they're starting some Blitz projects. MrGamble.com is a
Okay.
medium large player in online casino space. They converted from Next.js Insanity over to Blitz. Um, those are kind of the biggest ones. Oh, there's also a large US university, I think, that has a Blitz app now. So just keep hearing about more and more.
Okay. Yeah, I'm most interested, I guess, in those that are. So it sounds like a lot of internal projects, but even folks on customer facing, like it
Yeah,
sounds like is Mr.
yeah,
Gamble using it for
yeah. It's
external customer
yeah,
portal?
it's their
Okay.
consumer facing site. Um, there was some energy company recently they rolled out like their user facing thing is using Blitz now. So
Well, that's great. So what are the typical challenges or issues, folks should expect when putting Blitz in production, especially, pre 1.0, which would be for the next, 6 months or so, both in terms of development, but also in terms of deploying a Blitz site, I was going through your deploy docs as well, and it doesn't look like there's kind of the dream deployment yet of zero, DevOps with serverless, and then also the database in the same platform yet. But tell me, like, what folks should expect before we jump into that in terms of development or deployment that they should be aware of if they're going to try and deploy it.
So if you've done backend stuff before or full stack, like anything with a database, if you've done that
Yeah.
before, Blitz is very much the same. Like there's not much difference there. So you can use Docker, you can just use a regular node thing. A lot of people are currently
Mm-hmm.
using render.com to host their database and their Blitz app. So you can run it anywhere. If you want to use a serverless, like a lot of people use Next.js and Vercel, for front end sites, and then they use Blitz and they try to deploy Blitz to Vercel, but serverless is not well suited for SQL databases, and so that's sort of one of the big problems that people kind of run into if they're new to serverless or new to databases. Like serverless and databases is still kind of a wild west.
Yeah, it is, and that's actually I think how we first got chatting before earlier in our past conversations is some ways to make that easier, because there's a lot of folks trying to tackle that wild west of making serverless compatible with talking to the database. So would you say most folks are actually using it in a server full manner?
Yes.
They're running and managing servers, and
Yep.
then they have a database in front of it.
Yep.
Okay, so it is in some ways. It's again kind of back to the Ruby on Rails model, in some ways.
Yep.
But those challenges will get solved. Any other challenges that you can think of, like people are trying to face in deploying it or development for a production site?
It's mostly just some minor bugs here and there right now. So there's some incompatibilities currently with some third party libraries or plugins for Next.js. So like Next Translate or Next I18N, like some of the translating things aren't quite working fully with Blitz yet. So some of those they're mostly
Mm-hmm.
simple fixes that we just need to PR into those projects. But so it's sort of just kind of some minor edge cases that we're kind of trying to address for 1.0.
Well, speaking of Next, I know you guys forked Next. And there was some, I read, I saw on GitHub the RFC about it, and I heard when it happened. Do you want to give just a brief summary on like why you guys forked Next and how you plan to maintain compatibility and walked through that decision? Because you're using Next, but you've forked it, so it's a little, you're kind of off on the side of the mainline Next development.
Right.
So how did you get there, and yeah, what makes the most sense for developers to think about on that decision?
So when we were first starting to build out the Blitz stuff, we had to figure out like some way to layer on this extra magic functionality into a Next.js application. And I think we
Yeah.
didn't really consider forking Next at that point. I'm not sure why. In hindsight, we probably should have. Um, but what we did instead was Rudy, uh, another one of the early contributors, he built this kind of complex compiler setup using node streams and so forth that would take your Blitz code base, shuffle it around, strip out the magic, and generate a valid Next.js code base inside the .blitz folder. And then we would run Next.js from inside that folder. And so it's worked. It like the latest release as of right now still uses that. But it's honestly kind of hacky because you have this double file watcher
Yeah.
process. So like you change it in our directory and then we put it over in the other directory and the Next.js changes that or picks that up.
Oh
Um,
man. Yeah.
and then like stack traces, things like that are kind of messed up. And so it's amazing how well it's worked, but at the same time, like it's just too limiting to not first class. And so that's we talked about all this on the RFC if people want to look it up. But forking Next.js allowed us to move all that custom functionality into the core framework. And it allows us to
Mm-hmm.
have even more control and change internals than we even could before. And so now the Blitz Canary release that's out there right now is fully switched to the fork. We have all the logic in there in the core. It's just a much nicer, more first class experience. We have so much more control and ability to do things. But we are keeping up to date with Next.js. So we're merging in every new release. And so we're keeping compatibility with Next, and because that's something that Blitz users want. And so as long as they want that, then we'll continue to keep up to date with Next.js. But it does give us ability to diverge paths at some point. But like really what it comes down to is there's a fundamental tension between what Next.js wants to be and what Blitz wants to be. Next.js and Vercel, they're more focused on front-end experiences. And so they frankly just don't care about adding the power features that full stack people need. And so Blitz adds those power features that you really need for building full stack apps.
Interesting. So do you feel like, I guess the way I'm thinking about this is it's classically described in the Ruby on Rails like has a lot of magic, right? And you had to create all these hacks, it sounds like, in order to provide the same type of magic. And that meant you had to reach into the Next.js internals and kind of fork off of it. It sounds like forking it was a temporary way to resolve it, and you're going to keep updates. Have you tried, putting some of those changes to talk to the Next folks and say, hey, could you take this? It would make it easier for us to do that. Have you had those conversations?
Yeah, I've had conversations with Guillermo, and like there's a lot of, and I try to upstream changes as much as I can, but the Next.js team is like very conservative in features they want to add, so it's like it's like a year before you can get something in there if you want, depending on like the scope. Small bug fixes for sure, that's easy, but any kind of major feature that's like and so so for the most part we don't, like, I'll post RFCs over there, see what kind of attention it gets, but ultimately it's like it takes too much effort to get stuff into Next.js, and it's easier for us just to focus on building stuff in Blitz for now at least.
Okay. I mean, what it sounds like you're saying is you guys are catering to two different audiences in a sense.
Yeah. Well,
and
I think so.
that's the source of the tension. Yeah.
Like it's I mean, there's a lot of overlap there, but like there's a lot of people who use Next.js, but like there's a lot of Next.js issues and things in the Next.js repo where there's like tons of people in there like, hey, we have these problems, we want these fixed. For whatever reason they choose not to, and so we're kind of catering to like all those use cases that are not being met by Next.
Got it. Well, and in fairness to Next, they have a much broader surface area. Like they have
they just want to keep it really minimal.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing, they're conservative, is when you have such a large audience or customer base, change management becomes a much more involved process.
Yeah.
So and you guys are, in the early days of your development, and you're really finding out new ground in this full stack space. And so you do kind of, not only are you catering to different audiences, you guys are moving at different paces.
Exactly.
In your maturity. Is what it sounds like as well. Have you had to fork any other pieces of Blitz, or do you think you will? Because putting magic together might require full control over things.
No, we haven't. And probably the closest one
that
like we would have to would be React Query, because it's handles that data layer on the client. But React Query, it exposes pretty much everything you need already, and so like there's basically zero reason to fork right now, and I doubt there will be in the future. So the more extensible tools are, the less we need to worry about forking.
Okay. So, the other switching topics, elephant in the room, is like there's a bunch of these full stack framework contenders, and based purely on my intuition and awareness, it seems to be Blitz, Bison, and Redwood. How would you compare and contrast, Blitz against Bison and Redwood? In what scenarios do you think Blitz is the better choice? And what scenarios do you think the other guys might be a better choice?
So Bison is a boilerplate, not a framework. Bison is a boilerplate for Next.js. And I haven't heard much about it yet. I think I think it didn't really get enough attention for them to keep investing in it. Um, so, but I think they might still use it internally. Echobind, the agency, but Redwood. So
Mm-hmm.
Redwood is really the main alternative, and Redwood. So we Blitz abstracts away the API layer, but Redwood doubles down on it and
Mm-hmm.
uses GraphQL and makes it easier to use GraphQL in a full stack context. So if you're gung ho about GraphQL, go use Redwood. If you're not, then come use Blitz. So that's really kind of the key difference there. Blitz has um, so I'm honestly a bit surprised, but Blitz has now surpassed Redwood in almost every single metric. So number of like contributors, people in the Discord, forks, um, Twitter followers, GitHub stars, etc. And so Blitz seems to be striking a bigger nerve with more people than Redwood. But Redwood is awesome, and so we use them for inspiration of some things. They, I'm we talk back and forth and things. So definitely check it out if you want GraphQL.
So, and Redwood, one of the differences in my mind is Redwood doesn't base itself on Next the way
Oh
you
yes,
do
that's another big difference.
in
Yes,
Blitz.
yes.
And they have the cell concept. And my rough intuition from what I've read, I've not actually built something with it, is Redwood felt like it had more magic. I don't know if that's fair to say or not. But that's how it felt when I was watching it. I don't know if that's your assessment as well.
That's probably true. Um,
Okay.
Yeah. So like the magic and Blitz is mainly isolated to the RPC layer, the compile the API thing. But yeah.
Yep. I mean, and that's a personal choice. Like some people prefer more magic, some people prefer less. What do you attribute the fact, you, as you point out, the metrics on Blitz have been really phenomenal compared to Redwood. Is there anything you would attribute that to? Is it the choice of Next? Is it something else that you think? Why
The
do you think it's
choice of
actually
next,
striking a
I
nerve?
think, was a foundational choice. So it had to have that.
Okay.
Um, but beyond that, it's really the zero API data layer. I think is what's really hitting it for people. So like people love it, and I keep hearing from more and more people who were using GraphQL and they're switching from GraphQL to use Blitz because it's just so much more productive to not have to deal with the API layer.
Interesting. What do you think that says about, the future of GraphQL?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting times. I think there's still amazing use cases for GraphQL, like Shopify's
Yeah.
API, GitHub's API. Like those are perfect use cases, and I love consuming those type of APIs. But when I'm building a full stack app, like I don't want to mess with GraphQL. You know, so I think it's once you get to a certain point of scale, you want a dedicated API for third parties or whatever. But I think probably there's going to be less hype around GraphQL for like indie hackers, say, for small developers, side projects.
Yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense. When I think about it, uh it's like Ruby on Rails. You don't have to think about your API because you're a single person building something and you need to work across multiple layers of the stack as efficiently as possible. So
Yep,
actually decoupling the front end from the back end slows you down because now I've got two systems to manage.
exactly.
Whereas if you're a larger team, then you actually want to be able to move independently and you need that contract layer like GraphQL.
Yep.
And so I wonder if it might be just about the size of the team and how they prefer to work.
Yeah. So if like statistically, 99% of people work at companies with less than 100 employees. And so the vast majority of like apps being built are very small teams. And so the vast majority of apps that are ever built, they're never going to reach a point of scale at which um, decoupled front and back ends makes sense. And so it's much better to start with a monolithic setup, and you get really fast iteration speed. It allows you to actually get to market, to actually get customers and grow. And then when you reach a point at which you do need to start decoupling pieces out, then you'll have the resources to pay people to start building those out. And that's like a pretty well worn path. And a lot of people get hung up on like, oh, I need to start with microservices on day one. And like, no, that's a big mistake.
Yeah, the phrase, I don't know who said it, but I use it very often, is microservices are a solution to an organizational problem, not a technology problem,
Yeah.
more so than anything else. And it's a way of organizing your teams. You know, related to this, my impression is also that Redwood doubles down on shall we say a Jamstack architecture. All the pages that are first fetched, and I could be wrong at this, are totally statically generated, and everything then is API
Right. They
endpoints.
don't support server-side
Um,
rendering.
does yeah, exactly. How does Blitz? You know, Blitz looks like it's more server-side rendered, and then if you want to do the more Jamstack static, you have that capability in Next. I don't know how much you're using it in Blitz. Can you
So
just help
by
me
default,
understand? Like, are you guys on the opposite end of the spectrum? Yeah.
Blitz pages are static and do client-side data fetching. So essentially,
Okay, they
Blitz
are.
is like Jamstacky, but the Jamstack term is kind of hand wavy.
Okay.
Um, I don't really identify with it myself. I've never really called Blitz a Jamstack framework. Some people do, and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, Jamstack means that you have a lot of third-party services that you have to integrate together, and it becomes really complex to deal with. And so I'm much more a
Mm-hmm.
fan of
Yeah.
owning your stack, owning the functionality. I think authentication should be in the framework, not as a third-party service, things like that.
Got it. So instead of saying I'm going to do my auth, you know, with auth0 or Netlify identity, and my database is user information's in a CMS, and you're more like the Rails way. Everything's in this Postgres database. My auth, everything, and I own the whole thing. I can develop locally with it. I can
Exactly.
I can do whatever I want, and I have to maintain it. I have full control as well. Is kind of the trade off. Is
Right.
that fair to
Yeah.
say?
And the framework maintains a lot of that for you is the difference there. So you're still like a third party, getting your auth from third party, you just getting
Mm-hmm.
it from Blitz, which is open source and self-hostable and everything versus a third party service.
Got it. Again, very much like how it works in Rails, as far
Yeah.
as I know. I'm
Yeah.
not actually a Rails developer, but I've always worked with a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So, let's talk a little bit about flight control. I saw the tweet about it. Tell us what flight control is and when folks can expect to go live. Right now, there's just a page, but tell us more.
Yeah. So now that Blitz makes building the app so much easier, now when people would try to go to production and try to deploy their full stack infrastructure with the database, background processing, etc., like that part is still
Yeah.
really difficult. And it's a little bit surprising because there's so many players in the space, Heroku, Render, etc. But most of them are it's kind of the traditional platforms as a service hosting model. There's not really anything
Mm-hmm.
new about it, and people are wanting a next level developer experience. People want the developer experience that they get with Next.js and Vercel, but they want it for full stack and backend. And so that's really what we're solving
Mm-hmm.
with Flight Control. And there's really kind of three key things that is going to really enable that for us. So number one is being framework aware. So you have to have really kind of deep integrations into the framework, and that's what allows for Vercel Next.js to have that really next level DX. So we're targeting flight control initially for full stack Next.js and Blitz apps. And so we'll have that framework aware nature where you get an automatic CDN, automatic database, background processing, etc. Secondly is running on your own cloud. And this is really important for backend infrastructure because you need more control and insight into what's going on. And then you also want to be able to easily use other like layer one services like DynamoDB, SQS, etc. And those are really hard,
Mm-hmm.
if not impossible, to use from layer two providers like Heroku. And then
Mm-hmm.
thirdly is supporting both containers and serverless functions. So what we find is like a lot of times, let's say for background processing at a lower scale, one is cheaper or faster than the other. But then as you scale, then you need to switch and it becomes better to be long running containers versus serverless. So we're making it easy to switch between those both for hosting and background processing and without making any code changes.
Yeah, that sounds really excited. I'm feels like I'm talking to a kindred spirit. Like there's a lot of things that we've expressed opinions. I know internally, especially when Mark and I chat on like being framework aware and then bringing that same usability to kind of the back end.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. I think that's where the whole industry is going to need to go. quite frankly, because it just needs to get simpler and easier so folks can spend more time building their app rather than their infrastructure. When should folks expect it to go live?
So expect to start onboarding first people within a couple months. And we have a wait list that you can sign up for. We're over 600 people on the wait list now. And 10% of those are prepaying $20 for early access. So if you want early access, then go sign up, pay $20, and then we'll be in touch. So where we're kind of going with it is really functioning as your internal developer platform. So as your company
Mm-hmm.
grows, like we're that kind of central platform inside your company that handles all the DevOps for all your developers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, less DevOps, more dev,
Yep.
as much as possible is something we often try to say here at Layer Zero as well. So, what are you excited about for the post 1.0 problems you want to solve in Blitz? We talked a little bit about native apps, and that React Native integration just sounds really exciting. To be able to, in one swoop, not just get my full stack app with auth, but then have a native app as well. What else are you thinking of for post 1.0?
So to be honest, I haven't thought a lot about it. I've been heads down, getting to 1.0, heads down with Flightcontrol. But yeah, native apps is kind of one of the bigger ones. Definitely real time is something that comes up a lot, like people wanting WebSocket support, built-in WebSocket support.
Yeah.
Um, let's see what else. That's kind of the big things. There's a lot of other features and niceties, that we can add. The one thing we want to look more at is kind of more advanced backend architecture. Right now, we're pretty minimal on backend architecture. So like some people end up using
Mm-hmm.
Nest with Blitz, to have more kind of advanced backend
Mm.
stuff. So we'll be looking at ways to make backend, kind of more full featured. I think that's about
Interesting.
it. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're pretty much actually over time, but it's been a really interesting and fascinating discussion, Brandon. Where can people, go to find out more and follow you?
So I am Flybear, Bayer, Flybear on Twitter. Go to Blitz.js.com is kind of the central place for getting started with Blitz and all the documentation there. You can also get free stickers. Go to Blitz.js.com/stickers and put in your address. We'll mail you free stickers. And then if you're interested in flight control, go to flightcontrol.dev and you can put in your email there and we'll keep you updated.
Okay, great. Well, Brandon, thanks again for joining us. And I think that's about all we have the time for today. We'll see you next time on JavaScript Jam.
Awesome. Thank you.